Hi guys, my name is Dr. Whitney Costers and I'm a professor of English. And today we are going to look at one of the most useful habits you can develop as a reader. Paying attention to the choices a writer makes about what you're allowed to know. And I'm going to use Margaret Atwood's happy endings to think about selection, omission, repetition, pacing, and reader expectation. And then we'll connect these choices to the way meaning gets built for us as readers. So when you read a story, be aware that the writer has already made one enormous decision for you, what you're allowed to know. Think about a room, for instance. There may be hundreds of things in it, but the writer tells you about the half-empty glass on the table, the locked door, and the phone lying face down on the couch. Why point these three things out? This is the kind of question that begins analysis because now you're thinking beyond what's there and considering why the writer chose it, what it draws your attention toward, and how it starts shaping the way you understand the scene. And this is just one of many decisions that writers are constantly making. Remember, they decide what gets included, described, repeated, rushed through, delayed, and totally left out. But this also means we have to think about the places where the writer chooses not to direct it. We have a tendency to focus much more on what's there than what isn't, even though absence can shape the way we understand a story too. But if a writer gives you an entire relationship and almost none of the conversations between the people in it, that absence is worth taking into account. If you expect to know what someone is thinking and the story never gives you access to it, that's worth considering too. You don't automatically know why something was left out, but the gap between what you expect to know and what you're actually allowed to know can give you a really useful place to start. Now, Atwood's happy endings makes all of this unusually easy to see because Atwood does something really unique with the proportions of the story. But before I get into that, think about the phrase happy ending. Most of us already know what a conventional happy ending is supposed to look like. Two people meet, fall in love, build a life together, maybe have kids, become successful or comfortable, grow old together, and eventually arrive at the future we have been trained to recognize as satisfying. Atwood can count on us bringing those expectations into the story with us. But then she throws us for a loop by taking that familiar pattern and basically handing it to us immediately. In version A, John and Mary fall in love, marry, have kids and successful careers, travel, retire, and eventually die. And there it is, an entire life, and Atwood gets through it remarkably quickly. Now, before deciding what this means, stop for a second. What was just listed are enormous experiences, and another writer could spend hundreds of pages on almost any one of them, and a lot of them do. But Atwood doesn't. Instead, she deliberately compresses all of it, which ultimately changes the way we experience the events. So think about what happens to these major life experiences when they're presented in such a quick, objective way like a grocery list. Do you still feel like they're enormous events? Do you feel close to John and Mary? Or do you feel satisfied when they get the life that we're supposed to recognize as successful? Or does the way Atwood tells it interfere with the response you expect it to have? Now, these are crucial questions to consider because writers don't communicate only through what happens. They also control how long we stay with something, how much we know about it, what we learn about it, and what we never learn at all. And these choices shape our experience of the story before we ever decide what we think it means. And then, Atwood gives us other versions of these lives. Relationships and motivations change and circumstances get messier, but not everything changes. So while you're paying attention to the differences, also watch for what keeps coming back. So this is where repetition becomes useful because once something happens more than once, you have something to compare. You can start asking why the writer keeps returning to it and what changes when the same basic pattern appears under different circumstances. Now, this is also where I think readers sometimes move far too quickly because we just want to get to the theme or we just want to know what the story means, especially if we know that we're eventually going to have to write about it. But if you decide on the interpretation first, it becomes very easy to simply go back through the story looking only for the things that support the answer you already have. So reverse the process and start with what Atwood actually did. Where does she speed up? What does she repeat and what does she leave out? What do you expect her to tell you that she never does? What expectations did you bring to the story before she even had to establish them? And then ask what those choices do to you as a reader. Guess what we're doing here? Close reading. So first, we're noticing the choice. Then we're asking what it does, and only after that, we start asking what the effect might allow us to understand. So if you notice that Atwood compresses decades of John and Mary's lives into a few sentences, don't stop at the observation. Ask what the compression does. What happens when the ingredients of a conventional happy ending are all there, but you barely get to experience any of them? And the same thing applies to what isn't there. If you realize you know surprisingly little about what those people actually think or feel, ask what knowing more would normally give you. And then ask what happens because Atwood doesn't give it to you. So this is where the form of the story becomes significant to us as readers, because Atwood doesn't simply tell us what to think about happiness or endings and then give us examples. The repeated versions, the compression, and the changes from one version to another are part of the experience that she creates for us. If she had told one conventional story about John and Mary from beginning to end, we wouldn't be reading it the same way at all. So the way something is written can absolutely participate in the argument it makes. This also extends well beyond Atwood because the same thing happens in your own writing. Your reader only knows what you give them. They don't have access to the connections in your head or automatically know why one example is important, and they certainly can't supply context that you never gave them. Your choices about what to include, what to explain, what to emphasize, and how one idea leads into the next shape what your reader is actually able to understand. When you go back through happy endings, don't start by hunting for a theme. Start with what Atwood allows you to know, what she withholds, where she directs your attention, and what expectations you brought with you. Then ask what these choices do to your experience as a reader and what they might help you understand. And this is ultimately why close reading is worth doing. It teaches you to notice how meaning gets created before it ever arrives as an obvious statement. You become more aware of how writers guide attention, shape expectations, and influence what a reader understands. And once you can see those choices in someone else's writing, you can start making them more consciously in your own.